Have you ever physically had to squeeze yourself through a narrow space? When Jill and I were on sabbatical back in May, we took a trip down south and we were in Tennessee. And we went to this amazing rock garden place. And you walked all down and through and over these rocks. And there were a couple places where you really had to squeeze yourself to get through. And as we were doing that, I remarked to Jill that it reminded me of our church pilgrimage trip to France and one particular chapel we went to that had this really narrow door on the side of the chapel. And I even have a picture of Jill like poking her way coming out of it. And I remember commenting when we were there in France about, hey, they're doing Luke chapter 13. And that's our verse for today. Luke chapter 13, verse 24 is, strive to enter through the narrow door. For many, I tell you, will try to enter and will not be able. I just thought that was so great that we read that in the gospel, but here was a chapel in France where they actually physically had a narrow door on the side wall to demonstrate, hey, it's not always easy, right, to follow Jesus. And that's what we're talking about this week is who is Jesus to you? And Jesus is the one who invites us to enter into a narrow door. And by that he means it's not easy, right? It's not easy following him. This is a parallel to what Jesus says back in the Gospel of Matthew, where he talks about entering the narrow gate which leads to life. And there he says, and few there are who find it. And part of what Jesus is saying is that a life of discipleship, although it's offered to everybody, not everyone will pursue it, not everyone will enter into it or accept it. And there is a time also when eventually that door closes. One of the doors that we talk about is there's a door of opportunity, or sometimes we say a window of opportunity, which is really funny to me, right? Because who enters through windows? Nobody. So why do we say a window of opportunity? Door of opportunity is much better. You walk through a door. But Jesus is saying both here and elsewhere, like in Matthew 25 in the parable of the wise and foolish bridesmaids, that we want to respond to Jesus' invitation and offer when we can, as soon as we can, because there comes a time when the door closes. There comes a time when it's too late, and none of us knows when that will be. And so I want to encourage you, as Jesus prompts us in Luke chapter 13 in verses 22 to 30, to strive to enter through the narrow door. And strive implies it takes some effort, right? It's not easy. But do your best to enter through that narrow door, because as Jesus says in verse 25, when once the owner of the house has got up and shut the door, and you begin to stand outside and to knock on the door saying, Lord, open to us, then in reply he will say to you, I do not know where you come from. Those are words none of us want to hear. So strive to go in through the narrow door.